Hey guys, Kyle, the Death Knight of Anime here, and this is a video that's definitely something, well, pretty much normally out of the wheelhouse of what I'd normally do. Um, but the thing is, with several straight weeks of my schedule being completely thrown off with basically with no One Piece anime to review, I figured I figured that this is something at least new I can do for you guys in order to bridge the gap. In order to bridge that gap, like it's bridge that gap because yeah, I think from what it's still gonna be a while pretty much before we get any One Piece to review. So I figured that this would be something I could do in order to tie I guess give you guys something to watch. And yeah, as you guys see from the title, what I'm giving you is my top 8 ranking list of the DCEU movies. Now, largely when it comes to the DCEU, I've been probably just like with these franchises and with these comic book franchise filmmaking and cinematic universe things, I've largely been kind of that background sort of casual fan. I when it comes to these franchises, I try not to get too invested in them because, well, let's just say the fan base is kind of let's just say that the fan bases like pretty much scare me even more than the anime fan base. Believe it or not. Yes, I just said that. But um, but I figured that there is still some stuff to talk about because to be honest with you, there's a lot about this particular franchise that I've come around to, whereas others have definitely got. There's a lot about this franchise that I've come around to, whereas other stuff have gotten worse. So I think there is stuff to talk about. But with that said, yeah, guys, let's just get into it. All right, so coming in at number 8, I have Justice League, and I know a lot of people have Justice League as their second worst rather than their absolute worst. They always put Suicide Squad at the absolute bottom, but for me, this one is the absolute worst. And the thing with Justice League is that it's a case where I had very much tricked myself into liking it. Like when this film first came out, I actually really liked it. I think I had it like at a 7 or 7.5 out of 10 when it first came out. But but the more I watched it, the more it was a case where the more I watched it, the more problematic it became. And the thing is, too, when I first watched this film, I really chalked up a lot of my enjoyment up to the simple fact that it reminded me a lot of watching the Justice League cartoons, like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. But again, over time, the more I watched it, the worse it became, and eventually it reached after watching like some of those old cartoon like eventually after watching Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, it made me realize that that was a spin like me saying that the Justice League film reminded me of watching those cartoons. It made me realize it was a spit in the face to pretty much Bruce Timm's legacy and those cartoons because those cartoons actually hold up better than this movie did. Like those cartoons are DC in its prime state. But yeah, this movie it did not age well at all, and it did not. It just got worse and worse and worse. Like so, yeah, until it got to like a 5. Until yeah, it's basically a 5 out of 10 right now. It's that freaking bad for me. Um, Now, I guess obviously with me making this list and me putting Justice League at the bottom, I really can't go without talking about the behind the scenes stuff that went on with Justice League and specifically the Snyder Cut itself. And when it comes to the Snyder Cut movement and whatnot, I've very much been just like I've been kind of a casual fan of the DCU. I've also been kind of a casual observer of the Snyder Cut, and not because I wasn't necessarily in favor of getting Snyder's cut released or anything, but I try and remain in this sort of neutral, like middle ground stance when it comes to these movements, just for the simple fact of, in the case it does, just for the simple fact that in case it doesn't happen, I won't get too emotionally distraught over the fact that we're not going to get it. But luckily we are now, and I will say that, like I said, F no matter what happens with Snyder's, no matter how good, bad, or whatever else you want to say about Snyder's vision, I can definitely tell you, I'm definitely going to like I'm definitely going to like the Snyder cut more than I am this version. That's for damn sure. Uh, the only thing getting in the way right now is the fact that HBO Max is being, like, on top of all the other issues that are apparently happening with HBO Max. HBO Max is being a little stingy right now with the region availability, because here in Canada I can't access HBO Max, at least not for now. So yeah, hopefully it'll be available by available before the Snyder Cut gets released. But yeah, if it's not available by then, I I am gonna be probably forced to pirate it. Like it's not something I'm gonna like to do, but if HBO Max doesn't get their region availability shit together, I'm gonna be out of luck in terms of being able to watch the Snyder Cut legally. I'm just saying that right now. Um, Now, when it comes to when it comes to the other stuff, when it comes to the Snyder Cut, um, but when it comes to the other stuff surrounding the Snyder Cut, it's been very interesting because I think my personal thoughts on why they're releasing the Snyder Cut in general too is simply because I think WB and AT&T realized after they fucked up with what they did to this version of Justice League. I think they realized that they pretty much that they needed a lot more of a firm ground to stand on with this DC cinematic universe. So to that end, I think I think the reason why they're releasing the Snyder Cut in general is basically so that pretty much I think their mentality is by releasing the Snyder Cut they'll have a little bit more of a little bit more of a firm footing and little bit more of a jumping off point in which to proceed with the DC cinematic universe. That's I think what Warner Brothers and AT&T are thinking with even releasing the Snyder Cut in general. Like they realized that Justice League, that the way they handled Justice League, it was messed up in the way where or they didn't have a proper way in which to proceed. So they're releasing the Snyder Cut in order to properly proceed, in order to find a way in which they can properly proceed with this cinematic universe, I think. Now, in terms of all the other minor stuff with it, there's a couple of things I think that everyone might need, for better or worse. My thought process on all the other stuff surrounding the Snyder Cut and what could become of it are interesting because I definitely believe that one thing that's going to happen with the Snyder Cut being released, is that Henry Cavill is definitely going to be returning. That I think is definitely going to happen. Cavill, or sorry, like Ben Affleck as Batman, that one's a little up in the air for me because obviously from the rumors we've heard, he's returning for basically a mini the Batman miniseries, which I'm interested in seeing. But in terms of Ben Affleck's return in general to the DCEU, that one I think is very much going to be left in the hands of whether or not like Affleck himself will pretty much wants to return full time. Like it's obvious that the Batman is going to. It's obvious he's going to return to the Batman, but for this like Batman miniseries, probably if he does. But in terms of like Ben Affleck returning full time to the role, that I think is going to be a little more up in the air because the one thing I think we need to remember with Affleck is that unlike Cavill, who definitely has an emotional attachment to the role, I don't know if Affleck has as much of an attachment as he does. I don't know. Like, I'm sure he likes playing the role, but I don't think he's as emotionally attached. And honestly, in general, I think he's just Aff, Affleck is in a place where he just needs to decide for himself if he wants to return or not. Uh, but um, but yeah. So that's basically my long convoluted. So but yeah, that's my long convoluted whole tribe about Justice League, guys. But yep, let's move on to number 7. All right, guys. So coming in at number 7, we have Suicide Squad, and yeah, here's the thing. I get why people hate this one. I really do. I've seen it on a lot of lists. I've seen it on every DC ranking list I've seen. It's always at the bottom. But the thing is, I can't. Here's the thing. It's one of those things where, despite all the problems the film obviously has, I can never bring myself to hate it as much as Justice League. And I think a lot of that is because, unlike Justice League, where it's just a complete mess, it's nowadays just a complete mess. Like, nothing is good about that film. Suicide Squad, well, obviously, despite being hacked, being a total WB hack job like Justice League, there are still good things in it. I like obviously Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn. Will Smith is Deadshot. Like, just there are good, and even like Jai Courtney is Captain Boomerang. Like, there are good elements in this film, and it really captures like the whole idea of like of a villain group, of a villain like of a villain team. I guess you could say, like the Suicide Squad. It does capture that kind of dynamic. Um, I think where my and obviously, but I do recognize the obvious problems. Like, the pacing is just kind of all over the place, obviously. But I think the main problem I have with the film compared to other people, is that there's no sense of urgency. Like, if you've read any Suicide Squad comic, you'll pretty much know that basically those kind of operate on the whole idea that they're kind of like Mission Impossible. They kind of operate on the Mission Impossible logic of like it's always like a do or die situation. Like every single mission that the Suicide Squad goes on, it could be their last. I and the film itself doesn't really capture that feel. Like the pretty much plot of the movie itself feels very much like the kind of plot you could pretty much see in any you would see in any superhero movie. Like, it doesn't feel it doesn't feel like a plot you would see in a Suicide Squad movie. So I think like, for me, that's the biggest issue. It never feels like there's a sense that okay, that pretty much these guys are that these guys could basically die at any moment. I never get that feeling from this movie that any one of these characters could pretty much die at any moment. Now, and obviously granted, we basically see that Diablo dies in this, and his death is like, they do kind of build his likability of the character. So in that sense, his death does kind of make me a little teary eyed, but at the same time, it's just also kind of a death I just kind of shrug off to. So yeah, it doesn't. I guess at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that this film, while it has the name of Suicide Squad, it doesn't feel like it fully embraces that either. Now, obviously, the thing I need to talk about too is Jared Leto's Joker in this, and he's just kind of there. Yeah, I don't really have any strong thoughts on him one way or another. But yeah, he's just kind of there. Now, I guess obviously another thing I need to talk about is the Ayer cut of Justice League, and the fact that on top of the Snyder cut coming to HBO Max, we're also going to get that coming, the Ayer cut coming to HBO Max, and I'll be honest, like I'm intrigued by what Ayer's original vision is, but I'm not as go gung ho for it as I am for Zack Snyder's Justice League. Like Ayer's Ayer's like from the sounds of it, Ayer's cut of Justice League is gonna get me a little more invested in the character. Is gonna help in the sense of getting me more invested in the characters. But in terms of my personal like, am I interested in it? If I'm being honest, it's kind of one of those things where I'd rather kind of hop, skip, and jump over to something more like a Man of Steel sequel than I am to this. But than I am like intently invested on getting the Ayer cut out. Like I'm interested in seeing what Ayer's cut would have added or not. But yeah, I'm definitely a little more interested in in, but I'm not as invested or in that whole in what it would be. But yeah, guys. But that's it. Let's move on to number 6. Now, coming in at number 6, we have Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn, or Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, this one is an interesting one because in many respects it has kind of it weirdly kind of fixes the problem I had with Suicide Squad, but at the same time it is still a very flawed movie. Like there's so many things wrong with this film, and yet at the same time it's one of those weird things where the stuff I find good kind of balances out. So it's, let me put it to you this way, this is going to be a film where it heavily depends on your perception. Me personally, I like it. It's not a particularly deep or complex film, but it does kind of, it's not a particularly deep or complex film, but that I almost like it for that. It's kind of like, it's kind of got that. It's basically a dumb. It's basically a dumb fun action flick, just with DC Comics. That's kind of how I view it, honestly. With that said, despite any flaws I have with it, like this is one of those films where despite any flaws I have with it, like obviously the whole thing with, like obviously there are some clear pacing issues. Like this film goes way too fast, honestly. But 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 there's still some good stuff to appreciate. Like for instance, I'll be honest, as far as like reintroducing the Birds of Prey, like obviously you would want it to happen in its own film, but as far as introducing us to a newer, as far as introducing us to a live action like film version of these characters, it's a decent job enough. But obviously the thing to talk about is Margot Robbie, Harley Quinn herself. And I'll be honest, I like Harley Quinn. I like Margot Robbie, Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad a lot. Like she definitely was one of the high points of that film. But for me, this film, as its namesake is, it's just pure unfiltered Harley Quinn. Like that's basically the feeling I got from watching it. Is that this is Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn at her most unfiltered. And not gonna lie, I really got into it for just that reason alone. Like that reason alone was enough for me to say that I really like this film. Having said that, though, there are, and having said that, there are still a lot of minor things there are still a lot of things that I still find problematic with this film. Like for instance, I really liked, for instance, weirdly enough, I really liked Ewan McGregor's like take on Black Mask. Although I don't know if, although I'm kind of a little iffy in terms of his death. Now I want to assume what they're doing with what they did, what Kathy Ann did with Black Mask in this is kind of similar to what Far From Home did with Mysterio. Is that Mysterio is supposedly dead, but he's going to make a return. But he could still possibly make a return. That's what I'm hoping that they did here, is that even though they supposedly killed him, he's still going to make a return. I don't know, but yeah, like I said, I really liked Ewan McGregor's take on the character, but it did feel like a waste to kill him. The other thing I really liked about the other thing I wasn't too big a fan of is their interpretation of Cassandra Cain. Now, obviously, anyone who's read a comic no Cassandra Cain's backstory, the complexities, all the complexities that come with her character. But here, she's just a pickpocket, and I'm willing to give the film credit that I'm willing to give the film's, well, not necessarily credit, but definitely a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that just like with Black Mask and the possibility of him coming back, that what they did, that what Kathy Ann did with Cassandra Cain here is she just wanted to establish the character first and dive into the complexities later. That's what I want to assume happened here, but I don't know if that's actually the case. If that's what I want to assume is the case here. But yeah, let's just say when it came to Cassandra Cain in this film, that there was a vast lack of investment I felt with her character. But yeah, as a whole, I can't necessarily say I really hated Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. It is still a very fun film. I think that's the best way to say it, is that it's a very fun film. It's not deep or complex, but it is fun. So yeah, let's move on, guys. And coming in at number 5, we have Batman vs Superman Ultimate Edition. And yeah, I say Ultimate Edition because really I know there are people out there who like the theatrical cut too, but really for me the Ultimate Edition is really the only version of this film that I really recommend people watch. But yeah, number 5 is Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition, and the thing about Batman v Superman is that despite it being a number 5, it's still very much a case where the film has gotten better and better as time has gone on. Like I definitely like it more and more. Like Ben Affleck as Batman, Do I need to say how? I don't think I really need to say how basically good he is in the role in this film. Obviously, Cavill as Superman, although I will admit he does feel slightly underplayed despite the ad scenes. But yeah, as a whole, I really enjoy BVS a lot more than I have in the past. But if I really do have one thing to say about BVS, is that it's kind of one of those BVS is very much one of those movies where the first 85 to 90% of the movie is basically so thematically driven. Like there's so much substance and so many thematically and so many and from so many thematic plays that the film drives on, but then we get to the climax, and the climax is where any problems I have with the film are, because like I said, the film, the majority of the film is basically so pretty much thematically driven on the whole thing of basically should Batman kill, should there even be a Superman that exists in this world, or does the world even need a Superman? These are all pretty much great thematic points, and the film drives on this shit. But then we get to the climax, and that's where all the thematic stuff that the film was building on seems to have been thrown completely out the window. And don't get me wrong, the climax is epic in the sense where it's cool as shit to see the the Trinity fight together. It is cool to see that, but the thing is, the climax feels disconnected, so disconnected from the rest of the film. Like everything about the film is everything else about the film is so entertaining, is so entertaining and so thought provoking that when we get to the climax, it feels like all that is just kind of is it's all thrown out the window. Like, I guess what I'm saying here is that for basically everything that's good in the film, everything that Snyder does in the film is so great that it kind of feels below the film in it kind of feels a little bit below the film's kind of feels a little bit below the film in order to fall back on what I consider to be a pretty much standard superhero climax. Like it doesn't it doesn't feel like the climax with Doomsday. Like we can discuss the thematic relevancy of Superman's death in this. We can discuss the thematic relevancy of Superman's death in BVS all we want, but just the fight in itself with Doomsday feels like it feels just so vastly disconnected from everything else that the film was doing, and this is a film where it feels like you pretty much needed to go a completely different route than just your standard, what I consider to be just your standard superhero climax. So yeah, just it's a case where everything else in the film is amazing, it's great, but just that climax, it just feels just not it just doesn't there's a lack of cohesion between the rest of the film and the climb. What I'm saying basically is that there's a bit of a cohesion problem between the rest, everything else in a lot of everything else in the film and the climax. So yeah, and okay, so obviously with me saying I like everything else, obviously I do need to address Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, and I'll be honest, he's definitely one of the interesting parts because of the film because when I first watched it, I definitely kind of got on board with everyone else that didn't like him as Lex Luthor, but I can see in terms of within this story itself, I can find myself sympathize with him a little bit more. Not he's not a I definitely get what material Snyder was taking from with this version of the character, but and in that sense, it is actually kind of a very brilliant portrayal. It's not perfect though. Like it is. It's not a perfect portrayal, but it is a very interesting portrayal. It is a very interesting portrayal of the character from like it is a very interesting portrayal, and in that sense, it does. Lex Luthor is just Sandberg. Just Sandberg as Lex Luthor. He's one of the more intriguing parts of the film for me, whether or not I like him or not, I guess you could say. So, but yeah, guys, moving on. At number four, we have Aquaman, and this is one where obviously a lot of people have basically have had Aquaman on this particular on this particular part of the list. Like it always does end up at number four, but for me, this is actually one where you need to kind of look more at the score I give to the movie more than the ranking, because the thing with Aquaman is that yes, I recognize it has some severe flaws in terms of pacing and even in its and even a bit of tonal issues for sure. Like it does kind of switch between being a little too goofy to being well to being to obviously being to obviously having the more serious moments. And obviously, I think it uses way too many explosions. I'm just gonna say that outright. But honestly, if you really look past all the bad jokes and the conflicting tones of the film, I feel this is a very, I feel this is a very good like origin movie in terms of like an origin story for Aquaman. I feel it serves its purpose very, very well. Like if you really look at the, if you really look at the at Arthur's, if you really look at the journey Arthur goes through throughout the movie, his journey of trying to figure out where exactly he belongs, whether he belongs in man's world, in man's in the world of man or the world of the sea. You can clearly tell there is a journey he goes through in this film, and I feel that's one of the key things about Aquaman that does still make does still keep me coming back to it is that for however many problems that there are throughout this film, I can still find myself attached to Arthur. I can still find myself attached to Arthur's journey throughout the film. I feel that that's one of the key things. And now, in terms of the villains, I've I definitely like Patrick. I like Patrick Stewart. Definitely like Patrick. I definitely like Patrick Wilson's or Motion Master. But I think one of the big draws I've always found with this film in terms of who I think is the better villain, I think it very much is a is Black Manta. Like he's definitely the villain who kind of even though he's in the film for pretty much less than Ocean Master is, he's just in there long enough to the point where you can really kind of sympathize with him. Like you really understand why he hates Arthur, why it is he wants revenge. Like he's a very relatable villain. Like I'm not gonna say as relatable as Zod in terms of the DCEU, but in terms of his motivations are very clear, and you really kind of sympathize with that. Yeah, there is a part of you that kind of wants to see him succeed in his revenge. I'm not gonna lie to you. Um, but yeah, and of course the theme about and of course just the overall theme of family too, I think is definitely an important one to take away from this film as well. It's one of those things that does have a conflicting does conflict. The tones do conflict, but I think it still works in service of Arthur's journey and throughout the film. And of course let's just get this out of the way. That whole scene we all saw in the extended trailers with his with the classic golden green suit. That is that that pretty much that suit transformation alone, that is one of the best modern updates to a superhero costume I've seen in a long time. Like it's definitely up there in that. So but yeah, guys, that's all I got to say about Aquaman. Moving on. And coming in at number 3, we have Shazam. Now, Shazam is definitely one of those movies I did not expect to like as much as I did. Like when I saw the trailers, like obviously when I saw the trailers, I was thinking, okay, this looks lame. Like it it really was that it really like let's just say WB and Warner Brothers and DC, they really played up the whole thing of they really played up the whole comedy aspect. And I think and don't get me wrong, I think that and the fact that the fact that it was also advertising itself as a Christmas movie, I think are in part the reasons as to why it didn't necessarily draw a whole lot of people to the studio, like especially the Christmas movie part. Like they really kind of sold that. But yeah, getting back to what I was saying, I wasn't really, but when I watched it, I really liked it. And part of the reason for that is because of the dual perspective this film gives to both our hero and our villain. Like if you really look at this movie, like Billy, both Billy and Dr. Savannah mirror each other in vastly different ways. one of which again all ties back to the theme of family. Billy lost his family and Billy lost his family and he didn't know. Billy lost his family, and in his place, he basically he found a foster family who loved him and realized that his real family, that his real mother, while she did love him, she wasn't exactly prepared in order to raise him. So he basically had so basically he had a loving family in the form of his foster family. Whereas so he didn't have his family, he didn't have his real family, but he had a foster family who loved him. Whereas Dr. Savannah had his real family, but his real family thought he was, well, pretty much thought he had been a nuisance and a pest for his whole life. Like Dr. Savannah was basically treated like trash for his entire life. So it's a very dual perspective in terms of the family, in terms of the family like influences that both like turned our hero and villain into who they were. So in that sense, I think that in itself is one of the driving forces as to why Shazam is so loved as it is because it shows these two conflicting perspectives that basically that molded who our hero and our villain are, and it really drives the plot in a lot of ways. Um, and it's really one of the more compelling aspects. I mean, the comedy is definitely a little hit and miss, but the comedy is definitely the more hit and miss part. But it isn't too distracting either. I'd say like it kind of has. It's one of those things where when it comes to a character like Shazam, like if you read his earlier comics, you definitely know that Shazam isn't exactly necessarily one of the darker superheroes. At least not until he was modernized, I guess you could say. So there's that. The I'd say Shazam is a really good movie. The only two things I would have to say is that the ending is that the climb is that it kind of has a similar is that I have is that the climax is done the shift I'd say one of my biggest problems is the climax, and it's not necessarily the climax itself that's the problem, but more the pretty much transition into the climax. Like, well, after watching the movie several times, I realized that I don't think like when David Sandberg was directing this movie, I think one of his greatest obstacles was probably like molding that climax, because when you watch it you can see they just kind of suddenly shift. They basically go from one scene to the climax. Like it feels like there's not enough of a transition between pretty much between the film and the film's climax. Like it feels like you needed like a little bit of an extra scene or a little bit of extra time in between the two, in between the transition. But yeah, so one of the problems is that the climax feels like it kind of just it shifts you directly into it without much with all of a sudden, like on a very sudden pace. But the climax itself is really fun, I think. And the only other problem I have is the seven deadly sins. And the reason why I bring up and the reason why the seven deadly sins are a bit of a problem for me is that they're not necessarily bad, I guess you could say, but when you look at the design of the seven deadly sins in the New 52 comic, which this was adapted from, compared to the in the movie compared to the comic, when you look at the seven deadly sins from the movie to the comic, the seven deadly sins in the comic have a bit more of a each have a unique design and appearance, but with the seven deadly sins in the movie, they kind of have all very similar designs. So it's more that on an aesthetic level that the sins are all just kind of the same. They don't really stand out all that much. But yeah, aside from that, I'd say Shazam as a movie is still probably one of my favorites. But but yeah, guys, But yeah, guys, let's get for top two, guys. Let's do this.
And coming in at number two, we have Man of Steel. Now, Man of Steel has been a very interesting film, to say the least, when it comes to the DCEU, because when it first came out, I can't necessarily say I hated it, but I definitely didn't like it as much as I definitely didn't like it as much as I do now. And I think just part of that is because I wasn't in the right mindset and the right like and at the right emotional point in at the right emotional phase in order to really kind of start appreciating it. But again, after a while, so it's one of those where after a while it started to progress, and the more I watched it, the more progressively it started to become better and better for me. Like it didn't it's it isn't and there's a lot about it I appreciate now than I did in the past. Like Henry Cavill obviously is uh, and I do appreciate how this is sort of how this is a lot more of a personal a lot more a lot more personal dive into just the origin of Superman. Like it isn't. It is. It is very much like it is just focused very much on is on just Superman's coming into this world and coming to this world for the first time. And yeah, again, it does have that cynical. It does have that cynical edge of like of kind of what would happen if Superman were to exist, but it I can't say that I can't say that this wouldn't exactly be. I can't say it does have that more cynical edge to like of what would happen should Superman exist in the world, but it does have that it does kind of I can't say it's not exactly a wrong outlook either, but at the same time it doesn't shy away from the hopefulness of it. Like honestly probably my favorite scene in the movie is still that first flight scene. Like that scene alone is probably the greatest scene in the movie. Like Superman's first flight, yeah, it's great. And of course, Michael Shannon as Zod, all that stuff. It's just really good. If I'd probably say that if I did have any problem with the film still though is that and these are gonna sound like nitpicks I guess, but I think the big thing about this film though is that there are details in terms there are details when it comes to the Krypton sequence, and don't get me wrong, the Krypton origin sequence is just amazingly done. But there are certain small details about the film, mainly again in that Krypton sequence, and that carry throughout the film. That's like that it makes me say that make me say I definitely need a sequel. Like I need a I need a sequel that like addresses that addresses these details. But and like I said in my Justice League part, I think that there is a greater chance now. I think of us getting a Man of Steel sequel. I just don't know if we're going to get a Man of Steel sequel that specifically that specifically deals with these that specifically deals with these that specifically deals with the questions I have. So, but I honestly I'd just be honestly at the end of the day I'd just be happy with a Man of Steel sequel in general. And but yeah, and again like it is Man of Steel is just um is just a lot better than I pretty much originally thought it was. Um, but yeah, so number one, and I think you all know what it is. So yeah, obviously coming in at number one, we have Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman is definitely a case where obviously at this point it's definitely one of the more overhyped and overrated DCU movies in the eyes of a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, I can definitely understand that argument a lot. Like, in some respects, in some respects, like I definitely like in some respects I do like Man of Steel a little more than I do Wonder Woman. But where Wonder Woman kind of where Wonder Woman kind of is is has a person where I kind of have the thing is with Wonder Woman as someone who's been cynical and for someone like me who's just had a very cynical outlook on everything like Wonder Woman just kind of appealed to me in a more just kind of appealed to me in a bit more of a appeal to me in the sense where a lot of what the theme was tackling about humanity and our penchant for constantly wanting war, constantly wanting conflict, and just and what it meant to be in war. I kind of felt myself gravitating towards that message a lot more as with someone with my mentality. Like it was a thing where looking at it from the outside, I was like, yeah, this is the kind of yeah, humanity is humanity does very much have this dark side. We do have this penchant for just wanting to constantly get into fights, get into conflict. Like we just kind of have that natural dark side to us. We don't we just absolutely love. There's a part of us that absolutely loves war. That's was war causing harm to others. That's kind of who we are as a species. But at the same time, it didn't shy away from showing the hopefulness of it either. That yeah, there are those who go to war because they genuinely think they can make a difference, or that they believe that they can make a difference. It's it is again it is a very paradoxical in which it shows both sides of it that there are those that just love inflicting harm, love causing destruction, but then there are those who go to war simply because they want to simply because they want to they genuinely want to believe that what they're fighting for is right, and that they can make a difference. And I feel that and I feel for again for someone like me who's just absolutely cynical, um is absolutely cynical, it did present that duality very well, I think. Now, obviously, the thing to talk about with this movie is the very polarizing climax with Ares. And don't get me wrong, from a technical standpoint, the climax is very flawed. But at the same time, I can't help but deny that nowadays it feels like the most under it feels like the most underappreciated, or pretty much just underappreciated, or just misunderstood climax in the DCEU, because the thing is, Ares, even though yeah, it does fall into standard comic movie climax, which is one big brawl and whatnot. The thing is, Ares wasn't wrong. If you really look at that climax on face value, what did Diana achieve by killing Ares? Absolutely fucking nothing. Like, yeah, I guess in some ways it helped stop World War One, but World War One is all it stopped. It didn't stop World War Two and every other freaking conflict that's happened throughout history. And and assuming I can get a grasp on what the plot of Wonder Woman 1984 is going to believe, that's also going to be another another conflict that again that we as humanity just ended up getting into again. So yeah, like so whatever we have to say about the movie, I think that that climax is probably what really defines the movie. That Diana wasn't able to save anything, and yet, but that's not to say it wasn't worth it either, because what happened in the end is that she managed to at least gain she managed to gain of what she believed. She managed to gain knowledge of what she believes in as a hero. It developed her as of who she is. She is the she basically is the hero of truth and love, and that's what helped develop her into the hero we're pretty much gonna come to know later on in life. So yeah, it's again, what Wonder Woman isn't perfect. It does have flaws, but I think that there's a lot of misunderstood stuff about this film that just
again, as someone who's just cynical as hell, it really appealed to my really appealed to me emotionally. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I've got for this list. Just write down in the comment section what basically your ranking of the DCEU movies are. I'd really like to know, and to answer any question I'm probably gonna get if I'm gonna do like an MCU ranking, I'm probably gonna do that too. It's just gonna take a bit longer time because there's a lot of movies to get through with that one. But a lot of movies and a lot of videos to record with that one. So yeah, with that's it, guys. Uh, that's all I got. Enjoy the video. Like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and unless you're Control. That Night of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.